welcome back to my channel. My name is Muriel, and in this video I will be doing a review of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. This is as I'm sure most of you know, a classic of English literature. I first read at least 10 years ago, just like Jane Eyre, which I reread and reviewed last month, I'm pretty sure, or 2 months ago, whatever. And just as for Jane Eyre, I wanted to reread Wuthering Heights again to see if I felt differently about it. Additionally, since I'd read and reviewed Anne Bronte's novel The Tenant of Wildfell Hall 2 years ago, I wanted to have a completed trilogy of sorts of Bronte novel reviews on my channel. I enjoyed Charlotte Bronte's novel the first time I read it, and appreciated it even more after rereading it, but that was sadly not the case with Emily Bronte's claim to fame. I didn't hate Wuthering Heights the first time I read it, but mostly saw it as a story illustrating the destructive nature of wild passion, not an inspiring romance. This time around, however, I actively dislike this one. Wuthering Heights opens as a well-to-do gentleman, Mr. Lockwood, arrives in the countryside to rent a piece of property called Thrushcross Grange for a few months, and stops by the titular Wuthering Heights, the manor of his landlord. There, he is greeted by sullen and uncouth residents, which include his landlord, Master Heathcliff, and is rather put off by the abysmal reception they give him. Back at his own residence, he shares his upset with the housekeeper, Nellie Dean, who then unravels the dark, generations-spanning history of the neighbouring manor, or rather the Earnshaws, the family who formerly owned it, and their entanglement with the Lintons, the family who used to live at Thrushcross Grange. Said history starts unfolding the day Mr. Earnshaw, master of Wuthering Heights, rescues a gypsy orphan he names Heathcliff, the selfsame individual Mr. Lockwood just recently encountered, and adopts him into his family. Bitter rivalry develops between Heathcliff and his adoptive brother, but Emily Bronte's story is, of course, chiefly remembered for the friendship and destructive passion, or fine love, with about 1 billion air quotes affixed to it as far as I'm concerned, he develops for Master Earnshaw's daughter, Catherine. And indeed, most of Wuthering Heights portrays how this relationship plays out through time and branches out into heartbreak, jealousy, and a transgenerational obsession with revenge. Now, I've discussed both Anne and Charlotte Bronte's prose in the reviews I've made for their respective novels, which you're free to check out if you so wish, and honestly don't have much to add here with regards to Emily's. I'm quite frankly just not versed enough in the technical minutiae of novel writing to offer meaningful commentary on the precise differences between each sister's personal authorial style. I guess there are identifiable differences, but as an amateur and not academically trained analyst of literature, it all seems pretty similar to me, and all of it broadly falls, as far as I'm concerned, into romanticism. What I can say, however, is there was a smidge less overt, at least, Victorian and or religious moralizing on the part of the story's characters here. Then again, that could simply be due to the fact that most of said characters were, quite frankly, awful people no one should aspire to emulate. And whilst the story of Wuthering Heights is, like The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, also told using an open up in the present, then tell a story that started years ago only to follow its flow right back up to the present formula, sorry for that mouthful, the narrative framing here is also distinct in that most of the story is told at a partial remove by a very biased, potentially unreliable, I don't know, make of that what you will, observer, Nellie Dean. And I should add, a lot of what she knows doesn't actually derive from direct observation either. I'm not entirely sure it was the best way to tell this story, but it certainly gave it a unique, framing, but also tragic filter in a way, since being removed from the protagonists of the tale in this fashion helps to make them appear larger than life, as it were. Or maybe I'm just trying to be generous here in my understanding, as the fact the characters were a tad overdramatic at times for my personal taste is precisely one of the things I didn't like about this book. Indeed, I didn't like, much less root for, a single of Wuthering Heights characters. Kathy Jr. and her dad accepted a teensy bit, but even that's stretching it, honestly. All, or nearly all, as to make no significant difference, of the primary and secondary characters are either brutish, immature, spoiled, or just plain awful. And some are toxic assholes outright, if not a wee bit sociopathic around the edges. Yes, looking right at you, Heathcliff. That being said, does that mean the character work was bad? I would answer yes and no. The characters were sufficiently well portrayed, I suppose, but the fact there was so much drama involving a veritable smorgasbord of repulsive or otherwise annoying folks really soured whatever appreciation I could potentially have for the actual character crafting and development, and those aren't bad as such. However, I also think the very fact all these characters were awful and a tad extreme in their emotional drama beggared belief just a smidgen at times. The excuse of romanticism should and can only go so far, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, Hollywood kind of thrives on that shit, right? But I guess I prefer my toxic drama, is what I'm going to call it, with a glaze of fantasy or historical fiction a la Rome, the Borgias, or something like Game of Thrones, before season 8, of course. As to the giant romance, if you can call it that elephant in the room, and other character relationships, well, since the characters were drama kings and queens with genuinely unpleasant personalities, I found their relationships equally overdramatic and pretty much impossible to care about. Especially Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff's star-crossed lovers bullshit. Because yes, I call bullshit on theirs being a beautiful romance. I called mild BS the first time I read Wuthering Heights, and I call massive BS now that I've reread it. Theming-wise, I didn't get all that much out of this one. I was mostly going, ugh, every other page because of the tediousness of the drama, or the oodles of cringe I got from Heathcliff waxing poetic about his love for Catherine and, vowing sadistic revenge on everyone who ever thwarted his romantic and, climbing of the social ladder ambitions. Except for Catherine herself, of course, even though she chose to marry someone who wasn't, in fact, Heathcliff, but apparently, I don't know, that didn't register in his little brain. Still, out of principle, because that's just how I do in my reviews, I'll concede here that one can technically take away a measure of commentary about classism and perhaps social determinism from Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff, after all, starts out as a gypsy orphan, and this is, yes, held against him as a child by everyone around him but his adoptive father, Master Earnshaw, or his adoptive sister, then soulmate, Catherine Earnshaw. Middle-class Victorian society is mean to him, denies him education, dignity, respect, etc. Lo and behold, here we have the Pikachu face moment, not really, but, of Heathcliff not taking any of this lying down and finding a way to make something of himself. Huzzah! And assert ultimate dominance by stomping on anyone standing in his way. And also their children, as one does, apparently. I guess one could stretch this a wee bit further and also argue this is an illustration of the cycle of abuse. Alright, but last time I checked, being abused doesn't automatically turn one into a borderline sociopath. And besides, I'm gonna be real with you here, I am kind of sick and tired of having to extend unrewarded sympathy to horrible people, horrible abusive men especially, and this is an example of that, just because they were treated poorly as a kid. Especially when this specific bitch did technically have a loving father figure, however briefly, sure, and a loving adoptive sister / best friend come soulmate, freaking Catherine. For fuck's sake. I wasn't a big fan of the sprinkling of what I'll call dire social determinism a la Émile Zola I got in this novel either. So by dire social determinism, what I mean is because, for instance, parent character has psychological trait X, Y, or Z, child of parent character will turn out to have psychological trait X, Y, or Z. And why should you, the reader, expect anything else? Now, the narrative does present the inkling that things aren't quite as set in stone as some characters, Nellie Dean chief among them, make them out to be, and I'll concede that it is true that closed environments, or semi-closed environments, I guess, like the one you have in Wuthering Heights, can severely limit opportunities for personal individuation that isn't bogged down by psychofamilial precedent, shall we say, but still, overall, I just didn't like any of this sue me. And as an FYI, it's a huge part of the reason why I never liked any of the Émile Zola novels I read. Wuthering Heights can also be read as a tale of revenge and destructive passion, and that's principally how I read it 10 years ago. I read it as such this time as well, but again, could not be asked with the fucking drama and psychopathy of it all. Still, a tale illustrating the destructive consequences of revenge and passion, it most certainly is in my book. Heathcliff will burn everything to the ground and salt the earth afterwards in the name of revenge, and because he got the big man-sats at not being able to marry his Catherine. Though, once again, Catherine chose, of her own volition, to not marry her supposed soulmate. Just saying, I can acknowledge the commitment to revenge there as being impressive, sure, but it's also, you know, rather psychopathic, as it so happens. More broadly, the novel certainly demonstrates that following passion over reason does not a happy life make. Several characters follow their hearts over their minds, to put it simplistically, to rather disastrous ends. Not that I believe one should prioritize mind over heart either. To be clear, I think there should ideally be a balance between the two, and besides, I don't really subscribe to a sharp dichotomy or divide between those two things, aspects of the human psyche, but as per usual, another debate for another day. In any case, Wuthering Heights certainly rams home the idea that you should definitely not prioritize the reverse. So, you know, heart over mind. Which then obviously brings me to the crux of Wuthering Heights' literary notoriety. The supposedly beautiful, burning and soul-binding romance between Heathcliff and Catherine Earnshaw. Well, guess what? I call BS on it being an admirable romance. Straight up. Heathcliff, as far as I'm concerned, is a borderline sociopath, and I doubt bruv can even feel real love to begin with. Even granting what he feels for Catherine is indeed love, it is the most toxic kind of love imaginable, or I guess, I don't know, maybe it could be even worse. It's still shite, and I do speak from some limited, thankfully, experience there. It is morbid and destructively possessive obsession, and I really don't understand what Catherine sees in Heathcliff either. Then again, kind of related to what I just said, it's true, I've made questionable mate choices in the past myself, so I can't judge her too harshly there, I suppose. Mild spoiler warning here, so skip to this timestamp for my concluding remarks, if necessary. But no, I just do not care about the poetic beauty of the whole she's my soulmate and my other self, and life is hell on earth without her shtick, when it's professed by a narcissistic asshole who thinks nothing of seducing and maritally entrapping the daughter of his rival for sadistic kicks. Yeah, incarcerating the daughter of his supposed soulmate to fulfill a power trip, and who fantasizes about vivisecting his own freaking son, I think it was. Or, I mean, it was someone under his charge, because he cannot fathom how he produced such a mewling and pathetic weakling of a man. Yes, that's what he thinks of him. Seriously though, if you think Heathcliff of all fucking people, is the swoon-worthiest hero of romantic literature. I say this with compassion, but you need therapy. Because I'm sorry, who gives a fuck that he loved Catherine so much he wanted to canoodle her corpse? Bruv is fucked in the head, end of story. And Catherine is fucked in the head for loving him despite all of that, and no, it doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned that she dies before seeing half of it, sue me. Though fine, I'll concede, she wasn't quite as morally compromised as her male self. Call it the chaotic neutral to Heathcliff's chaotic evil, because why not? As to the whole other self deal, look, I personally find value in the concept of soulmate myself. And think of my ex, for instance, as a male version of myself. Yes, but those feelings never, ever, and never have and never will cancel my sense of individual self or the sense of my loved one's individual self. I have never once thought that soulmate meant clone, and certainly not that it meant clone in the service of my life and my whims, like our brother Heathcliff clearly does with regards to his beloved Catherine. So, quite frankly, fuck that and fuck him. Wuthering Heights still most definitely qualifies as romantic literature. Once again, friendly reminder that romantic, the way I'm using it in reference to art and literature, doesn't mean generic, cutesy, lovey-dovey stuff. Dark romantic literature, yes. Gothic literature even in a way, I suppose, given there is a bit of a pseudo ghost story bopping about in these pages. But it's not, again, as far as I'm concerned, a romance or an inspiring love story. Like, seriously, get the fuck out with that nonsense. I jest, of course. If you genuinely understand this as a love story, that is your right as an individual reader. But may the gods have mercy on your soul. As I've made, I think, abundantly clear, I didn't enjoy the drama, nor the toxic characters. I'll assume that stuff was groundbreaking for the time period, what with the moral sensitivity and general prudishness of the good old Victorians, but in our day and age of the streaming wars and shows like Game of Thrones, Borgias, Succession, which I haven't watched but my parents are watching and enjoying, any drama produced by HBO, really. This sort of story is rather commonplace, don't you think? And like I said, referencing some of the aforementioned shows, if I have to, or just want to indulge in such drama, I'd rather do it with a coating of fantasy or historical fiction. Please and thank you. Additionally, I'd completely forgotten that apparently Twilight, yes, that Twilight, with the sparkly vampires, apparently was partly inspired by this. And we all know that 50 Shades of Grey, what's actually straight up fanfiction of Twilight. So that kind of means we wouldn't have 50 Shades of Grey without this. Which, I don't feel good about that at all. Wuthering Heights was quite simply a big fat flop of a reread for me. I gave it a 5 out of 10 rating, and it thus stands in third and last place in my ranking of all 3 of the Bronte novels I have now read, with Anne Bronte's The Tenant of Wellfell Hall in second place, and Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre in triumphal first place. I'd say read Emily Bronte's novel if you have a general interest in English literature, sure, but wouldn't otherwise recommend this one. And that concludes my review of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. And I will probably never reread it again. But that's okay because it's a Penguin English Library edition, so it can just go back in my semi-collection. I hope you found this review interesting, informative, entertaining, what have you, all the good things. If you want to share any thoughts or feelings you have about this novel or any other of the Bronte's bibliography, please feel free to do so in the comments down below or on the channel's Discord server. There is a link for it in the description box down below as well. And on that final note, I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all reasonably soon in the next video, which will probably be my May reading wrap-up. But until then, bye-bye.